On behalf of Sequoia Group, I welcome each of you joining us for this critically important webinar. We are thankful also to Michael and his team, who are really incredible individuals. Had an opportunity to meet Thomas just a few months ago as well, and Tamara, you're going to find they are highly competent, and in addition to that, they're very personable. It's a wonderful blend of human relations skills as well as expertise in the field. We're joined today also by Kevin Harsh and Tomas Hayes. I say that I've thrown in a little bit of a Brazilian Portuguese pronunciation of the first letter of his name. It's just a habit. I apologize,
That's okay.
Tomas. Tomas Reyes is how we call him, and Kaisa, of course, who many of you know, who has been instrumental in putting this webinar together. Steve Fitt, who is our CEO, asked that I conduct in his stead. He has an overlapping important assignment today. I rest assured that he'll view the recording of this, and we thank you each in advance for your allowing us to record this session, as it will be broadly distributed to Sequoia's client base. And Tamara, we don't want you to feel like you're in the spotlight, even though you may be, because there'll be an opportunity for you to answer questions or present questions which you have. And please don't be intimidated by the fact that it's being recorded and others will see it. This is actually a gift to our clients at Sequoia, who will begin to know the proactive tax compliance strategies and ability to reduce risk and save time that will be presented by Avalara today. So without any further ado, I'll turn the time to Michael and to Thomas Price.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate the introduction and of course, our partnership with Sequoia. Oh, sorry about that. Was I on mute?
Yes, I think that was my fault, Michael. I apologize.
Okay. No, that's okay. No, thank you for that great introduction, David, and really appreciative of our partnership with Sequoia. I kind of laugh a little bit because when you talk about tax compliance and David discussed our good human relationship skills, you have to have a good sense of humor and to be able to relate to people because sometimes the topic can be a little dull, right? But we're gonna make it exciting. We're going to cover a lot of different things that I really think will help your customers, you, Tamara, just different strategies to reduce risk and save some time when it comes to dealing with tax compliance. So this is a disclaimer. I am not a CPA or a lawyer, so this is informational and is not legal or tax advice. Just to give you a little bit of background, I don't know if you wanted to briefly introduce yourself, Thomas, and your history.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas Price. I've been with Avalara since November 2021. I think I just had my official 3-year anniversary. So been a great time here at Avalara. And before I joined Avalara, I actually spent the previous 7 years with Infor. So 10 years collectively in the Infor at Avalara space.
Thank you, Thomas. And I'm going on almost 2.5 years with Avalara. I joined Avalara actually leading up their beverage alcohol partnerships. And to give you a little bit of background, prior to Avalara, I ran a large winery, so I'm very familiar with manufacturing and distribution. And I was also had the opportunity to run compliance management for a year at that winery. So very familiar with the compliance, very familiar with the cost of manual compliance because it can be very expensive if you're doing this manually. So we're just going to talk about a number of different things, but here are the main highlights. We're going to talk about the U.S. tax landscape, just some trends and updates to keep you all in the loop of what's happening in the world of tax compliance here in the United States. We're going to talk about some different way to navigate sales tax compliance, and then Thomas is going to wrap it up with covering the Avalara compliance suite. Again, if you have any questions during this time, please ask. So this is a pretty important slide because it shows you how much that states rely upon sales tax for their revenues. So you can see here that it's very significant, right? Like almost a third of a state's revenues come from sales tax. So these states want to get their sales tax, and this slide is really fascinating because it shows you by all the different states, the percentage of state revenue that is derived from sales tax. So you can see in states like Texas, Florida, Nevada, those are states that are relying a significant amount of their income for the state comes from those sales taxes. And then this other chart shows the individual income tax reduction, corporate income tax reduction, kind of like the landscape of what's happening in the United States when it comes to tax rate reductions. So tax rates and rules and requirements change very often. You can see in 2023 alone, there was over 11,000 sales and use tax rate updates, over 85,000 taxability updates in the United States and Canada, 98,000 sales tax holiday rule updates, and over 6,000 international taxability and 337 international rate updates. So just imagine trying to do this manually. It's virtually impossible, right? So we're going to talk about how Avalara can help you keep up to speed on these different tax rates, rules, and requirements. So to take it back for a step, in 2018, there was a historical ruling by the Supreme Court in favor of the state of South Dakota versus Wayfair. Basically, this changed the entire tax compliance landscape because before the Supreme Court ruling in 2018, 6 years ago, the only requirement to collect and remit sales tax was if you had physical nexus, if you actually had a store, a manufacturer, if you had a manufacturing facility, distribution warehouse in that state, that was the only thing you were on the hook for. But with this ruling and with the advent of internet sales, if you met a certain economic threshold, you are now responsible to collect and remit those sales tax in those different states. So the net result of the Wayfair decision was that businesses everywhere now had to pay attention to tax rules in every state. And of course, the states don't make it easy for us, right? Each state has a different requirement for their economic nexus. So when we talk about nexus, we first have to understand what is nexus. So it could be a number of different things. It could be that physical nexus we discuss. It could be the economic nexus we discuss, which is based on number of transactions, or based on the value of those transactions. And I'll get to those slides here shortly. Or it could even be if you have inventory in a different state, maybe you have a data center in that state, maybe your investor board meetings are a different state. Any type of those activities could be nexus generating activities. So as a business, it's really important to just think about where your business may have nexus. And this especially sometimes is triggered within businesses if you're, for instance, a rapidly growing business, right? If you're expanding into different geographies. And then also, it's extremely important if, again, you're expanding, maybe you now have a warehouse that is going to hold more inventory for you. Maybe you have a state that's performing extremely well, right? So you want to put some reps, boots on the ground there to move your product. So it's really important as a business when we think about Nexus, because you're going to be taxed on it and you want to make sure that you're registered if you do have Nexus in these states, that you understand where your business is operating and be really aware of the events that could trigger you having Nexus in these states. All right, so sales tax obligation nexus can be created in many ways. You saw some of the examples on the previous slide. So any of those business activities could trigger the obligation for you to collect and remit taxes in states where you have these activities. Again, economic activity, whether online, mail order, phone, a physical presence, which I discussed, right? Like you have your warehouse or manufacturing facility there. Even if you have marketplace inventory, which I'll touch on here shortly. Maybe it's you have some affiliates, another company that provides services on your behalf, or even referrals as well. So again, understanding your business where you could potentially be triggering where you could potentially be triggering nexus in different states. So this is a really good slide or section of the presentation here to just keep in mind. As I discussed, every state has different sales tax nexus, right? They don't make it easy on you as a business. So those are usually triggered with as little as $100,000 in sales or 200 transactions. Now, we're going to talk about exemption certificate management because exempt sales can establish a sales tax obligation as well. So this is really critical to remember as a business, especially if you're a distributor, which is primarily this audience, I would imagine, is that just because you don't have a sales tax obligation, you do have a requirement to report those exempt sales. And that's why exemption certificate management is so important. And then, of course, 45 plus states do have require marketplace facilitators to collect, remit, and report sales on any third-party sales if you're using a third-party marketplace. All right, so I like putting these reminders in because it gives us a sense to just pause and think for you and your business is, do you have an obligation to collect or remit sales tax, also known as nexus? So this is the map that's covering economic nexus. Okay, I mentioned it could be as little as $100,000 in sales, or about 200 transactions. But you could see here, this is a multicolored map, right? So each of these states have different economic nexus requirements. So you could see how it'd be really difficult if you have business in 3 or more states making over $100,000, just even manually taking control and making sure that you're correctly collecting and reporting that sales tax could become quite burdensome.
Hey, Michael, if I could add one thing,
Absolutely.
and marketplace kind of falls into the idea as well, but the idea of exempt sales as well, even though you may be selling to resellers, so therefore that transaction is not tax exempt. A lot of these states still count those exempt sales to exempt entities against these thresholds. So just another tidbit to keep in mind, maybe if you're doing this on your own and trying to determine where you have true sales tax nexus.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. That's a great call out. I mentioned it again on that slide about the importance of reporting those exempt sales, but that's a great call out because some states those will count against your transactions. So thank you. So this next slide is pretty fascinating to me because marketplaces are very prevalent. And again, there's different states that you could see here where you are required to register and file returns with that state, even though you're using a marketplace. So again, it just shows you that each state is very different, and that there's different requirements for those states, especially if you're selling through a marketplace. It's not a free pass, right? You still have to be aware of the different state requirements if you're using a marketplace in one of these states. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the states again, since they're getting about 30% of their income from sales tax. They have different ways, and they are investing in those sales tax audits because it's such a key source of their income. So what are some actions that they sometimes use? They could be hiring more auditors. We're in the world of AI now, right? So they're employing AI and data mining, sharing information with other states to target potentially non-compliant businesses. And an audit for the past years within the state's statute of limitation could be from anywhere to 3 to 8 years, or they're even increasing out-of-state audits. Sometimes even encourage whistleblowing of disgruntled former employees that could become whistleblowers. So these are just a number of the different ways that the states are focusing on businesses that may not be compliant, especially when it comes to not properly reporting those states they have nexus in. And when we talk about your business growing, that of course can add complexity and increases your tax risk. So I mentioned this earlier. If you're a business that is growing, you have states, and you can see all the different requirements for those states when it comes to nexus. And then there's different potentially sales channels. Maybe you've been traditionally B2B, but you're now exploring B2C. There's different technologies depending on what ERP, or if you're upgrading to a new ERP, what type of e-com platform that you're using. And then, of course, there's use tax as well, which Thomas will cover a little bit later as one of the products and services that Avalara can help you with. So companies that are audited can owe unpaid tax plus penalties and interest, and they're likely to be targeted for future audits. Of course, compliance is not optional, it's the law, and peace of mind is indeed priceless. So again, these are just reminders. Tax compliance is complex and unavoidable. I'll just highlight some of these key pieces when we discuss this. And you saw the numbers earlier. The sales tax rates, rules, and requirements are always changing, right? And it's a lot to keep up with. And then the manual cost of compliance can not only be costly, but there could be fines, fees, and penalties that could happen to your business. We're not going to cover this, but e-invoicing is something that will probably be happening in the not so distant future. But it's just something to keep in mind when we're thinking about tax and compliance. And this is a slide, another reminder, within the United States, over 13,000 sales and use tax jurisdictions. And then these are just some more statistics with how many businesses still risk managing tax compliance manually. You can see the percentage there who manually calculate their tax rates at 36%, are remitting and returning 46%. Managing exemption certificates, this is really jumps out at me. Again, my background in running a large winery, I did compliance management for a year. This was over 13 years ago. So I remember having to manually not only collect licenses, but having to register in those different states. And it was a full-time job for one employee doing compliance management for a year. So if I could have this type of automation, it would have been extremely helpful, where I could have been helping out in another part of the winery. And important to you, for you all, what you do realize as a business is compliance isn't a revenue generating part of your business, right? It's something that has to be done. So if you could automate some of it, this gives you the ability to put perhaps those personnel on revenue generating activities, whether it be marketing or sales or improving your cost of goods sold, right? So again, manually preparing for audits, that's up to 59%. So this takes a lot of time if you're doing your tax compliance manually. And I really like this slide because it shows with this current survey of what businesses find most challenging. One of the top ones here on your ladder is keeping up with the changing tax laws. Again, from personal experience, the winery I worked for, we shipped wine direct to consumer and wholesale. So we had to have licenses and make sure we had the right volume checks and everything. But we had to check those with each of the states. And so I was manually going to each state's website, making sure that we were charging the right sales tax, make sure we had the right licenses. Avalara has this really cool tool called Avalara Tax Research, and it's almost like a Google for tax that helps you as a business go in and research what are some of the changing tax laws in a state that you are currently doing business in or want to do business in. So it's a really amazing tool and something definitely that Thomas can speak to you directly with if you're interested. Tracking managing nexus. We also have what's called the sales tax risk assessment. If you don't even know where to start, where you may have economic nexus, Avalara can help you with that because you could see that is definitely something that businesses find challenging. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit more about managing those exempt sales, especially as a distributor. You may have a lot of exemption certificates that you're trying to manage manually, and that could be taking up a lot of time and taking up a lot of money. We have the sales tax calculations. Avalara also has a tool called Avalara Avatax that goes down to the rooftop level and is an extremely accurate tax engine. And then we talk about remitting returns, right? So you know you have nexus perhaps in a state, you know that you have to get a license, and then you know that you have to collect and remit the sales tax, and we can definitely help you on that. And we do have international support if anyone's doing any type of cross-border business as well.
Michael, may I ask a quick question before we move to
Sure.
the next slide? I remember in a conversation you and I had earlier this year, there was a brief discussion about different tax jurisdictions existing. I think it may have been in the state of Colorado, where there was a different jurisdiction even on the same street. The line was drawn through that. Am I remembering that correctly?
That's correct, David. You have a very good memory. It can definitely happen. And so a lot of businesses, I would say most businesses that I deal with think it's your sales tax rate is based on your zip code, but that's absolutely not true. Even on the same street, you can have a different sales tax rate. And Colorado gets really tricky because there's just so many different counties and just different tax rates that without Avalara's Avatax to go again down to the rooftop level, it's nearly impossible to get the right sales tax calculation. And I can definitely say, you know, it is amazing how accurate it can be. To give you an example, when I onboarded with Avalara 2.5 years ago, there's about 30 or 40 of us in our class, and one of the tasks was to just so we understand how difficult it was, try to figure out the sales tax rate in Colorado at a specific address, only using the internet and like what are the tax rates and not being able to use Avalara. And no one ever gets it right because there's all these different rates that you have to get accurate. And it's pretty eye-opening. And it's like seeing that businesses are having to deal with this is a tremendous value for your customers because then you know you're getting it correct, right? Because you're having to collect that sales tax and ultimately return it to the government. So this is going to be a new slide that we have, and it's going to just walk you through the cost of missing an exemption certificate. Again, a lot of distributors manage their exemption certificates manually. Some of the common challenges that I hear from distributors, even manufacturers, is number one, even getting the exception certificate from their vendor, right? And then also making sure that those exemption certificates are up to date and are not expired. So let's go ahead and step through it. Let's say your business is being audited and the auditor reviews a 1 month sample for an audit period of 36 months, right? So going to go back 3 years. So the auditor finds $15,000 sale with a missing invalid certificate resulting in an uncollected tax. We'll use the rate of 8% or $1,200. So what happens at that point? So the auditor will naturally assume that the amount of uncollected tax for each month during the audit period, right? And so ultimately, what will happen here is that the uncollected tax fine is calculated as that $1,200, okay, 8%, at 36 months, which could result into a $43,200 penalty for missing one exemption certificate. So it shows you the importance of being able, if you can, to automate this process because humans make mistakes, right? But we definitely like showing this slide because it shows really clear here the cost of missing one of those exemption certificates. Thomas, do you want to add anything on this?
Sure. I'll actually give a real life example too. This is a company that I worked with recently. I won't share any names, but just to give you an idea of why this is important to have in place on the front end, this company in particular, they shipped all over the country, but were only registered and reporting in a handful of states. And the state of Texas actually sent them a letter and let them know that they were going to be under a sales tax audit. And so this company, unfortunately for them, was under the assumption that simply because of who their customers were and their customers' taxability, that they simply didn't need to collect tax, and that was that. While that is true, they didn't need to collect tax. They also needed to collect the appropriate documentation that proved why they didn't collect tax. And so Texas did just this. They did, they looked through some of the documentation or what documentation they had, which in this case was none, and they gave them an initial assessment of over $400,000. So this is a serious need potentially, depending on your business, depending on your process. Exemption certificates are very important, and it's as simple as that.
Uh, Thanks, Thomas, for the real world example. And that was just one state, right? For that penalty.
That was just one state, and so then they have the responsibility of either trying to collect that documentation back from those customers if they have it, if they still exist, and if that auditor in that particular state is even willing to accept documentation after the fact, which is also something to consider.
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely better to be prepared ahead of time. Okay. So speaking of exemption certificate management, Avalara has this end-to-end automation tool basically to help you simplify your workflows, automate that collection, and it helps you reduce your risk, drive those efficiencies, and improve customer satisfaction. It's just kind of funny because this flowed really well, right? With that real world example, if that company would have had something like this in place ahead of time, they would have had documentation. And what I've found, or at least learned with being with Avalara, is it really helps with your audit trail, right? Because you have all the documentation loaded, it's securely on the cloud. I could even say again, doing compliance management for a winery 13 plus years ago, it was in my big file cabinet, all of the licenses to all the states, and uh, it definitely needs to be stored in a very secure method, and Avalara's exemption certificate management can definitely help you do that. In addition to helping you with saving time and money. I am going to briefly talk about 1099s. It's a new product that Avalara has that can help you easily manage your 1099s, W-2s, 1095s, W-9s. It's paperless. Um, it's a standalone product that's really easy to use. You can even see some of some of the different examples of such as QuickBooks that it works with, and there's very transparent pricing. Just another tool to think of, especially if you have maybe contractors who do installations in different states, or you have a lot of contracted personnel that use 1099s. So I am going to hand it off to Thomas, who's going to talk about how Avalara can help with all of our different products and services when it comes to managing your tax compliance.
Thanks, Michael. How about one click? So we understand that there's you and your business, and you don't just sell to customers, you have to purchase those things to sell to your customers. So one click. So with that, being able to do business compliantly, you need to understand what licensing or tax registration that you need in place. That may require that you assess your compliance risk. You may have a requirement to submit some voluntary disclosures. And then amidst all that, you've got property that you're operating your business. So you may have tax assessments and property tax returns that you're responsible for as well. Click. So Avalara provides specific solutions for each of these requirements. We have a dedicated business licensing division We can provide services as simple as business license guidance. What business licenses do you need in a particular location? All the way through a full-blown license management solution. If you have field service reps or you have multiple locations across different state lines, our license management solution might make a lot of sense to help you manage all that licensing. Additionally, along the topic of sales tax nexus, let's say that you have expansion requirements as far as where you need to be reporting your sales tax nexus or your sales tax overall. We can help you with the sales tax registration process. And that kind of segues into the sales tax risk assessment. We also have a professional services division. If you're in a place where you don't really understand where to start with determining your sales tax nexus and you have concerns there, we actually have a team that can help you with a sales tax risk assessment. It's basically our moniker for a nexus analysis, where we can help you determine not only where you have nexus, but when you establish that nexus and any potential financial risk associated with that unaddressed nexus. With this assessment, we'll provide recommendations, including potentially voluntary disclosure services that we can provide support with as well to help you get registered in and compliant with the states in which you should be reporting your sales tax. And then lastly, we have a dedicated solution and team for your property tax requirements, including calculating assessments and filing those property tax returns. So then once you're compliant, ready to do business, then you want to sell your product. And so with that, you've got some more requirements. You need to calculate the correct sales tax, collect documentation like we talked about for those exempt sales where there is no sales tax to be collected. Once you have all that, all those sales completed and enter a new filing period, you'll then have to file and remit your sales tax. And depending on where you sell to, if you're selling in certain places that have e-invoicing requirements, you'll need to send e-invoices as well. Additionally, to do all of these things accurately, you also need to understand the taxability of your products. Again, if you're selling cross-border, you need to assign the appropriate HS codes, calculate customs and duties charges, and collect those federal documents that Michael just mentioned, those 1099s and W-9s. So Avalara has, again, specific solutions for all these compliance requirements. AvaTax, again, our tax determination engine to help you with real-time accurate tax calculations. This solution has a pre-built integration to your N4Fax ERP. So as you're creating invoices, all of this can happen automatically for you in the background. We manage not only taxability based on where you're shipping to, but also product taxability and tracking exempt sales as well, which that flows into ECM, our exemption certificate management solution. We can help you streamline that entire exemption certificate process from capture, storage, ongoing management, which includes tracking expiration dates for exemption certificates, ensuring that you collect the correct documentation from your customers. There's even a customer-facing guided experience to help your customers make sure that they not only provide the correct documentation, but that it's fully completed with the appropriate information that they need to provide. We can also automate the sales tax returns filing process with our tax returns and reporting offering. That includes populating your sales tax returns for you, filing them on your behalf, remitting payment to the jurisdictions in which you owe. And if you're using this solution with us, you can even upload your tax notices to us and we'll handle those on your behalf as well. We also have and continue to build out our e-invoicing and live reporting capabilities as those countries that have these new e-invoicing requirements continue to expand. And then for those supporting products below, you see tax research. This is a standalone solution which does just that. It helps you find answers to any and all sales and use tax questions you might have. Item classification, cross-border as well. And then we mentioned the 1099 and W-9 offering. We can not only help you file your 1099s at the end of the year, but we can help you with the W-2 collection process throughout the year to help this process be much smoother and cleaner and automated at the end of the year when you have that requirement to file. We understand, though, that it's not just your sales that require some compliance as well. Also, your purchasing. You may need to accrue tax on your purchases. You need to provide your own exemption certificates to your vendors to ensure that you're not charged sales tax. You also need to report that use tax as well. One more click. And all the same supporting products flow into these requirements as well. One more click, Michael. So again, AvaTax also supports the use tax reporting side as well as our accounts payable functionality, which can help set up parameters and set up workflows to help you track your use tax requirements as well. Again, we support that vendor exemption side of things, providing your own exemption certificates and tracking and making sure your vendors have it on file. We can flow that use tax reporting requirements into our managed returns filing service. And then everything else from the supporting products also support the payable or use tax reporting side of things as well. So these core and supporting products make up our product portfolio: exemption certificates, tax calculation, filing and remittance, and everything that you need to do all of that correctly falls into these core and supporting products. In addition to these, we support multiple integrations, not just to Infor, but say you're considering launching an e-commerce platform. We could probably integrate pre-built to that solution as well. We also have marketplace support. If you're using a marketplace for any of your sales and you weren't aware that there may be some sales tax requirements in addition to what you may have assumed, we have extractors to help pull that data into your AvaTax instance and flow into the reporting process when that becomes a requirement for you. We even provide point of sale support. If you have storefronts and point of sale, we can push content to those different solutions to help you ensure you're providing the correct calculations there. And we even have a robust API that you can build to. So if you're using a solution, we don't have a pre-built integration, not a problem. We can develop to that as well. And then from a professional services standpoint, we're actually a member of the Streamline sales tax program. We're a certified service provider, so you can get some free services like sales tax returns and registrations. We touched on the sales tax risk assessment and helping you determine your nexus. We also provide implementation support as well as training and then different support options to support what solutions you may use from us. You'll see a couple of M's popped up as well. We also provide some managed services options. Just to touch on one that's probably most relevant, managed services for our exemption certificate solution. We can help you manage that whole process. If it's something that you just want to outsource, it's too much for your team to manage, our team can help you not only with the collection and campaign to collect process, but actually validate that documentation that comes in as well. If you would like to talk in more detail about any of these solutions, sales tax compliance, your nexus risk, whatever it might be, we'd be happy to have a conversation. You can see my contact information on the screen. You can either screen grab that or feel free to reach out to your Sequoia rep to get our contact information. But we really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Michael, do you have anything to add before we pass it back over to David?
No, that pretty much wraps it up. Just really appreciate the time, David and Sequoia team, to talk to your customers. And like Thomas said, please reach out, continue the conversation, and let us know how we can help you with your tax compliance needs.